All right, it's 1 p.m. here in Finland, so let's get going. So greetings from Jyväskylä in central Finland. It's a kind of a cloudy plus 6 degrees Celsius here today, and welcome everyone to today's webinar, How to Leverage Wellness Data to Boost PT Business, with practical insights from Luke Worthington, who is joining me today from London. We have a really interesting 30 to 40 minute session ahead of us, where we're going to hear Luke's thoughts on various challenges that today's PTs face, and also tips for boosting your own wellness business. We will also share some examples of how Firstbeat Life data can bring added value to a PT who wants to upscale their business. I'll start off by introducing Firstbeat and the Firstbeat Life service, and then we'll move into a discussion with questions from you for Luke. You can also write questions in the Q&A box, and then we'll read them from there at the end. You will get access to a recording afterwards, so no worries if you're having technical issues or, for example, have to leave early. My name is Tiina Hoffman. I'm an exercise physiologist and master trainer here at Firstbeat. My own background is in Nordic ski racing, and I was also a Nordic ski coach for many years when I was younger. But today, for more than a decade now, I have worked with the well-being and performance of regular working age people, trying to help them find ways to find a better balance with their life and perform better. And at this point, I'd like to welcome Luke Worthington, who is a highly sought after and known PT from the UK with over 20 years of experience in the field. Luke, do you want to tell a little bit more about yourself and who you are and what you do?
Sure. Well, thanks for inviting me on as well. So as per your slide, so I've been in the health and fitness industry for, well, it's 24 years now, actually. So I started out in commercial fitness and then moved from that into freelance consulting in sports. That's where I thought that things were at. So I did a lot of freelance work in football and rugby, then specialized more in football, and worked for many years with various different international and Premier League players, but on a freelance basis. After several years of that, moved back into commercial fitness, but I guess in an educational capacity. So I worked for several years for a kind of luxury gym chain in the UK, running their trainer education program. So as it was a business that was rolling out, so as it rolled out, my responsibility was to upskill the PTs in-house, make sure that the product was uniform, that it was of a high enough standard, and that it was keeping up with current science and current trends. And my career has sort of taken a bit of an unusual step over the last maybe sort of 7 or 8 years, in that I've now moved into almost solely the entertainment space. So I now do strength and conditioning work for entertainers. So whether they are, typically it's for film roles. So typically I prepare people for action roles on screen, sometimes on stage, but where people have to look a certain way, but they also might have to run and jump or fight or do stuff. So it's kind of, I now do a lot of work of athletic training, but in not where you might typically see it. So not on a sports field. They are people that you might see on screen. So superheroes and the like. It's quite a nice niche, and I've been doing that for the last, I guess, of eight years or so.
Okay, that's great. Definitely a niche and interesting field, but top performance is as important or more important there as it is in the sports field or in life in general.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, a couple of words about Firstbeat Technologies, because we noticed that we have quite a few new people online. So we are truly considered a pioneer in physiological and heart rate variability analytics. We have been working in this area for 20 years, actually had our 20-year anniversary last week, and strong base in science. We have done a lot of validation studies and research, and continue to work in different kind of research projects to validate our data. Our methods have been sold with over 50 million consumer devices with Firstbeat features inside of them. This part of the Firstbeat business actually is part of Garmin today, but our wellness and sports sector work independently. We are based here in Finland, and we are a leading provider of professional grade physiological analytics, both in elite sports and in wellness. Over 1,000 elite sports teams worldwide use Firstbeat teams such as Manchester United or Arsenal as examples, but also many Premier League teams in the NHL, NBA, and so on. And we have business in over 70 countries today, and our headquarters is here in Jyväskylä, where I'm sitting today. And then Firstbeat Life, the product that we are going to be talking a little bit more about today, also as part of a wellness coaches or a PT's toolkit. So it's a personal wellness solution and a coaching tool to help improve your client's well-being and performance, with the idea that it gives a window into the client's sleep and recovery, the balance between stress and recovery and exercise, what they do during the daytime. And we'll get into a little bit more detail with some examples in just a second, but first, sort of the positioning of Firstbeat Life. So on the left-hand side here is sort of any kind of consumer wearable, typically a ring or a wrist-worn device, some kind of a fitness band or fitness watch that is designed for consumers to use independently in their own life every day of the week, every day of the month, maybe all day and all night. It's so-called consumer-grade reliability, and the idea is to help them hopefully make better decisions about their lifestyle. And then on the other end of the spectrum is sort of medical products. So products that are used mainly by health professionals that are medically certified, used in the healthcare sector, typically by some kind of doctor referral. And obviously there is need for that when there is some kind of more serious problems. Firstbeat Life sort of we place that in between these two sectors, because we are a wearable, but we are sort of a professional grade wearable, meaning that the data that we gather, it's very accurate and detailed. We use wearable grade ECG measurement. So instead of an optical detection of the heartbeat, we have a device that I'll show in just a bit, but it actually detects every beat of the heart electrically, and that allows us to do very detailed heart rate and heart rate variability analytics. And the idea is that it's used for proactive and preventative health promotion, and can be used by employers and individuals, and then specifically, as we'll talk about today, as a tool for professionals to get a view into their client's life. Before we look at a few examples from Firstbeat Life, Luke, do you have any sort of comments or thoughts on this? Do you see your clients using wearables, and what are your experiences with that? Are they always a big help, or are there sometimes some challenges with that?
Yes. So the products that exist on the left, that the everyday wearables, the wearable tech, I have just noticed over the last probably 4 or 5 years a huge growth in the number of people who are seeking them out and using them. But I think really, something I know we're going to talk about a little later, that's probably my thoughts on that, or that's a greater desire for information, greater desire for data from end users. Something that I'm very aware of in the industry is people want to know why they're doing stuff. So they're moving on from just receiving instructions and saying, well, I should do that because my trainer said so, or because it said so on this app that I follow, or whatever it may be. They want to know why. So I think there's a greater desire for data, but then data is only as useful as it is accurate, I suppose. And that's which I think marries into your point very well, because something that I was very aware of and kind of receiving from clients and just from people in general was they were wearing the tech. So they're wearing the watch or the ring or the band, whatever it may be. And they were also using bits of cardio kit in gyms, and they were receiving data from one and it wasn't matching up with data from another, and say, well, which one's right? Which one do I follow? It's all a little bit confusing because all these numbers don't quite add up. And so the accuracy of the data was clearly an issue. And as soon as people lose confidence in something, they stop using it. So I completely agree with you. There is a gap that is obviously the gap that you've aimed to plug. And that gap was, there is a desire for data, but what I was observing was people wanted to use it, lost faith in it because numbers weren't quite making sense, and then just stopped. And then, then we're no further forward.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I actually I would say that that applies to any device, whether we look at the consumer wearable sector or Firstbeat Life, that even if the data is accurate, we still have to interpret it in the right context. And we'll look at an example in just a minute, but they can provide huge added value as long as it's accurate and as long as it's interpreted in the right context, instead of becoming like some kind of a larger than life fact. And then people tend to forget to actually listen to themselves. So in the right way, definitely very useful. Okay, a couple of things about Firstbeat Life solution. So it works as a personal health and wellness solution for the individual and also for the coach. And for that, we use a highly accurate heart rate variability sensor. Looks like this. It's called a Firstbeat Bodyguard 3. It's attached on the body and it detects every beat of the heart all day during work and leisure time and sleep. And then in addition to that data gathering device, then the client will have an app on their phone, Firstbeat Life app, that shows the results, different parts of their result, whether it has to do with sleep or stress and exercise. And the idea is to sort of learn to connect the dots between how your body is reacting to different events in life and what kinds of things promote, for example, recovery, and what kind of things cause stress. So stress management or stress and recovery balance, sleep and exercise are the three key cornerstones what this kind of assessment will look at. And the idea is to be able to track your progress and set goals, ideally together with a personal trainer or wellness professional. So the app itself, every individual has it, they can see their own result, but in order to really truly make sense of the data, it's really extremely valuable to have a wellness professional working alongside the individual with this. And here's an example of the data. So this is a 24-hour graph from Firstbeat Life. The red color, you can see that means stress or activation. It's a very normal state. It means that your sympathetic part of your nervous system is active. We don't need to worry about it. But then in addition to that, we would like to see some of the green, which means that your body is slowing down. Your heart rate slows down and your parasympathetic or resting part of your nervous system is activating. And the blue color means exercise. And the whole point of doing this is to start seeing how these different states are balanced. And we look at that with a stress and recovery balance score across 24 hours, the health effects of physical activity score, and then restorative effect of sleep. And together with the journal markings that the client keeps, then they can make sense of how those different daily events affect their day. And I think, Luke, you had a really interesting example about this that you used in one of your clients. I think this might be a good time to share that.
Yes. Well, as we were talking about before we came live, when this data is very interesting, but it's only really useful when we correlate it with what somebody was actually doing at that particular moment. And I have a client who is in the middle of a test cycle of this for me at the moment. And he and his wife have a 6-month-old baby, and he was adamant that being woken up throughout the night was hugely stressful for him, and it was impacting on everything else. And so he's wearing the tech as he goes about his business. But what we actually found was he was being woken up in the night by the baby, as 6-month-olds will do, and he was getting these red spikes when he was being woken up. But then when he went to attend to the baby and was then soothing him and trying to get him back to sleep, it turned green again. So the actual interaction of him with his baby was soothing for him as well as for the baby, and that was quite interesting. It wasn't what he thought, it wasn't what he was expecting or maybe hoping to use as justification, but it was very, very interesting to look at that the process of being awake in the night wasn't necessarily wholly stressful. The process of being woken up was. But then what he did when he was being woken up was restorative to him. So I think that it just sort of underlines that point, really, that this data is only as useful as what we correlate it to.
Yeah.
What were you particularly doing at that moment, and what therefore can we take decisions on what should we be doing more of, or what could we perhaps be doing less of throughout.
Yeah. That's a really good example. And actually, parents of small children, I've seen quite a bit of data like that we think that it's all stressful, but actually our body kind of learns to cope with that. And also highlights the idea that the green color that we see here, it doesn't mean necessarily that I can't tell from the green color if a person is asleep or awake at that time, or for example, this red part here, it just means that the nervous system is either recovering or it's activated. So you can indeed recover even when you're not asleep if you're doing something enjoyable and relaxing. So good example. One more thing before we go into a few other questions, just to highlight to some of, if any of you have used some of our former Firstbeat methods. So the real-time data feature is also really interesting to people. So while they're doing a measurement, anytime they open the app, they can see this red and green and blue graph accumulating. So they can, for example, look at it towards the end of the workday or sometime during the day and see that, okay, nothing but red stress all day today. So maybe it's time for me to take a break and try to relax a little bit, or no sign of blue color, which means exercise. So maybe it can serve as a reminder for them to get active and go walk around a little bit. So the real-time data it's an added value for the people that they can kind of peek at it during the measurement, but then the complete result is calculated after they finish the whole measurement. But let's look at a little bit more broadly now, because we know that personal training field, it's definitely today, it's definitely much more than the time spent in the gym. So it's a more comprehensive project, and you guys need to have quite a bit of information about your clients. So considering that, when we think about your clients, what are the sort of the most unique challenges that your clients face, Luke?
Well, mine, as you mentioned at the start, my current clients are quite a peculiar niche, really, in that we are effectively treating them like professional athletes, even though they're not. You know, their body is their livelihood. So in my mind, therefore, this is how we approach it. But their priority is not their physical performance. Their priority is what this end product will look like and how it can appear on screen, what they can do. So having worked with elite athletes, having worked with general population, then having now working in this entertainment space, it's quite different, and it picks up elements of all of those. Now, when I was working with professional athletes, as I know you do and have done a lot of, getting buy-in for anything is really quite easy because it's their job. So you effectively tell them what to do and they'll do it. You tell them where to be and they'll be there. General population, it's a very different challenge. But in this entertainment space, it's kind of marrying the two. It is their job. So there's a certain amount of, I guess, traction that we have already. But trying to relate what I'm asking them to do with their end result is always the challenge. So therefore, as much kind of weight and a sort of gravitas that we can add to that, the better. To try to get people. A training program is only useful if somebody follows it. You can have the most fantastic program that was ever written, but if someone doesn't follow it, it's no use at all. So getting somebody to actually adhere to what we're trying to do is always the most important challenge of a trainer, no matter what population they're working with. That's always got to be the first priority. So any kind of extra bit of sort of ammunition, if we like, that we can have to get somebody to actually do what we want them to do, the better. And this project for me was just one more piece of ammunition that I have to say, yeah, well, I want you to do this because, and now I can show you. Now I can show you some information and some numbers. So rather than just do it because I say, do it because it's good for you.
Yeah, that's true. I think the kind of data that we just looked at, and we'll look at a few more examples, that's one of its biggest values, that it can open people's eyes to see something that they really don't know otherwise, because in busy lives, people get so used to feeling a certain way, and they might have way too much stress or way too little recovery, but they get used to that. And then when they actually see the data in front of their face, so that can really be a powerful tool to sort of point the direction in a better way. What about, do you see some changes in the industry in general, sort of compared to before? What are some of the latest maybe trends or challenges that PTs in general, also outside of the sector that you work in?
Yeah, so the biggest changes that I've seen, so when you say before, I tend to always think of kind of, at the moment, I think of like pre and post COVID. So, pre-COVID, pre-pandemic and lockdown and the whole industry shutting down, the health and fitness industry was booming. It was cool. Everybody wanted to be a part of it. It was, there were gyms and studios opening up all around the world, and it was the thing to do. Then it was taken away. And as it started to come back, health and fitness has probably never been as widely discussed as it has been in recent years. Your health, you couldn't, for nearly 3 years, you can open a newspaper or turn on television without health in some form being discussed. And I think that the big change now to pre-COVID was fitness was cool. There were fitness competitions, there were aesthetic competitions, there were, functional fitness events. All of these things were happening. But then maybe the health part was slightly overlooked. The fitness part was booming, and everybody wanted to be a part of that. Post-COVID, when we've kind of had this real shock to the system globally, I think the health part is now the more dominant part. People actually want to know how do I become more resilient? How do I become more resilient to disease if this happens again? If touch wood, it never does, but if this happens again, how can I be better positioned to deal with it? How can I be more resilient to disease? How can I live a healthier, stronger life? So I think when we're talking health and fitness, that health part is now the bit that's underlined, whereas it wasn't. It was the other way around. That for me is a change. People really want to know about the genuine health benefits of what they're doing, as opposed to they just want to look better, or they just want to run faster.
That's great. It's great to see, it's a more holistic approach towards their fitness and wanting to sort of a more intrinsic motivation perhaps than externally motivated. So yeah, I agree. I don't do personal training, but I've seen that with my corporate clients, for example. Okay, one more question before we look at a couple examples of data. So just to make sure we don't run out of time in the end. So do you have some tips or sort of general advice from more from a business building perspective for somebody who wants to build a successful PT business?
Sure. My advice that I always give on this very common question that I get asked, actually, probably because I've been in it a long time, and the answer really is to always be looking to improve the product. I think in the age of social media and things being digital and so forth, there can be a temptation to think, well, that's where it's at, and that's what success is about an Instagram following or a big YouTube channel or any of this stuff. And people can earn money from that, and that's it's not to take that away. That could be a viable business. But if your business is actually training people, whether that's face-to-face or whether that's in a group setting, whatever format that may be, constantly looking to improve your product is the key to a successful business. Being a good coach is the key to making that happen. So are you able to deliver a great product, deliver a great service, and show your clients? I always think you have to show clients two things. You have to show them success and progress. So you have to meet the client where they're at in terms of creating the program that they can do, that they can find success with, and then look to progress them from there. And if we can show people success and progress, we get buy-in, and then you have a business.
Right.
If what you're doing is creating a massive sales funnel and having, a fantastic social media presence or great website and all of this stuff, you might be getting a lot of people in, but then if you don't have anything really of value to deliver, you're having to constantly chase your own tail and be losing clients and having to find new ones. And that can be an exhausting process to be trapped in. That if all of your energy is spent on developing your brand as opposed to developing your product, it can be a tough business. So my advice is always develop your product. Be really, really good at training people, be really, really good at coaching, be looking to upskill yourself technically before you're looking to build a brand, build a following, all of that stuff.
Yeah, that's great. And also for long-term sustainable client relationships. So you definitely need to have that. It's not only just the initial numbers, but that you can keep them coming back. So exactly. Great. I think this super compensation principle in general really relates to what you were talking about when you were saying the different kind of challenges people have, and there's sort of a more health perspective on why they are doing that. So as any any listeners who have been trained in fitness and sports, you are familiar with the supercompensation principle in sports. It's sort of the driving principle behind athletic performance, that if you want to improve your performance to the next level, win the gold medal or win the next competition or improve your time or your result, you have to train really, really hard, push yourself beyond your own comfort zone, and then get enough recovery. So it's really this constant battle on finding the balance on how hard can you train and still recover from that. If you don't train hard enough, it's a status quo, or if you train too hard, then you start getting overtrained. And from that, we really started to apply that principle to regular people. We talk about supercompensation of life. And the idea really is that we need a regular person, whether it's one of Luke's high celebrity clients, or whether it's a corporate athlete who has a busy, hectic, demanding job and then wants to be also a very high level corporate athlete, maybe attending CrossFit or triathlons or marathons or something like that. So they really have to have all aspects of their life in balance. It's not only about the training that they do, but they have to have enough recovery to compensate for all the stuff that they push themselves with. Training is one, but then there is the nights awake with their baby, or the stressful demands of the job, or all the different stress factors that are there in their life. I often call it the load of life, and it's all those things, and that has to be in balance with the resources. That's what this graph is trying to illustrate, that if that balance is right, no matter how hard we push ourselves, if we are in a good balance situation, then the recovery periods should be able to bring us back to the starting level. And is this something that your clients struggle with, trying to find that balance between all the demands in their lives and then still be able to train?
Yes, so I'd say with my clients, it's less of, we have less of an issue of overtraining, probably more of an issue of under recovering. And they may, some people may argue that's the same thing, but if we're looking at people with sort of people I work with currently and the demands on them throughout the day or throughout the week, it isn't really overtraining as such. It is definitely under recovering. When they are spending a very long day filming, it may be that and there's somebody I'm working with at the moment who's on prep for a big movie role, and she's shooting very long days. So the only time we can work out right now is at 9 o'clock at night. And she has call times at the moment of 5:30 a.m. So we're working out 9 o'clock at night. We're probably getting done 10:30 p.m. She's getting home maybe 11:30 p.m. and then she's eating, then she's going to bed, and then she's getting picked up at 5 to be at the studio for 5:30. So she's working out for probably 50 minutes. So she's not overtraining as such, but she's definitely under recovering. And because she's being pulled in too many different directions. And that's, so if we're able to show that, and we're able to show that she has to be able to perform physically to do this role, and she has to also look a certain way for it as well. And there's a little bit of a kind of a tug of war, there's a little bit of a back and forth between the people who set the schedule are also the people who want her to be able to perform a certain way as well. So the workout is important, and the workout is being scheduled and paid for by the studio. So that's non-negotiable. The long shooting day is also being scheduled and paid for by the studio as well. So there's this little tug of war happening where if you want her to be at work for this amount of time, and she's going to be, she's going to have, an hour putting all these prosthetics on and all this stuff, and then she's going to be shooting all day, then have it all taken off, and then come and work out, something's got to give somewhere, because she's not going to be able to do all of this stuff. And at some point, it's something will give. So that's an interesting kind of little tug of war that I'm in right now. She is under recovering from the workouts, but the workouts are necessary for her to do the job. So can that schedule be adjusted? Can we perhaps build it in during the day? Can we build it in some other way so that she gets more green lines and she has some opportunity to recover? Yeah,
that's a really good example. And I brought it back to this picture because that's actually with a lot of people who have really busy lives, and maybe family lives and work lives, trying to fit the exercise session. It can be challenging to find a good time for that. And many times people end up doing that fairly late in the evening. And in itself, it's not a problem. Oftentimes, like, for example, with your client, sometimes that's the only time that it's possible to do. But this kind of data, like here's an example of somebody doing a really, really high intensity training session about 7 p.m. and their night, it's not horrible, but you can see a lot of red spikes in addition to the green spikes. So clearly their body, their nervous system is not in the optimal place to recover that night. And when a person sees this kind of data, it helps them sort of plan, and it helps the coach plan the program for that week to make sure that you don't do this kind of high intensity late evening sessions too often, because that will compromise your sleep that night. That perhaps then the next night you need to really prioritize an easier training session, for example. And this applies for high-level athletes just as it does for regular people. But yeah, definitely can be a challenge. And somebody actually had asked about this red and green a little bit more. So yeah, the red color, really, we utilize the heart rate and heart rate variability data to differentiate between what is sort of a mentally stressful situation versus mentally relaxing situation. And the green color reflects that parasympathetic dominance. It means that your heart rate is low and your heart rate variability is high. And red is sort of the opposite, with an elevated heart rate and lower heart rate variability, whereas the blue color is then exercise. So then the program identifies that now it's not a mental stress, but somebody's actually moving and breathing heavier, and then we can notice that that must be physical exercise. So that's what the colors kind of differentiate. One more example from data here. This is an example that I see a lot with clients over the years, because they do these measurements in their normal daily life, and that's sort of the whole idea, to do it in regular daily life, to learn how different kind of days affect your physiology. This is an example of a person who did a busy work day. You can see a lot of red here during the work, kind of a long evening, and then out to the pubs for a few hours, having some beers, and you can see the stress level sort of getting higher and higher in the evening. And even when the person is going to sleep here about midnight, the stress reaction persists all through the night. So the red color doesn't mean that they didn't get any sleep at all, but the restorative quality was not very good at all, because the stress system was very active, because that's what a lot of alcohol it does. It keeps the heart rate elevated. And I kind of wanted to get your take on this from the point of view, we all know that, I mean, a lot of people know that if you drink loads of alcohol in the evening, your sleep's probably not going to be great the following night. But how would you take this into account with a client who has a physical training program on the side, and you have to kind of take that into account?
Yeah, so this is, if I think back to my kind of general population fitness days, it's a fairly common, I guess, assumption, even though as professionals we know it to be an inaccurate assumption, of I've had a stressful day, so I'm going to have a couple of glasses of wine and that's going to relax me. But the data contradicts that. So I think this is very, very useful in those settings when we're talking just general lifestyle with clients, and they might say, well, yeah, it was a terrible day at work, this happened, that happened, or I had an argument here, there, and everywhere, so I had a couple of glasses of wine after my dinner to calm down, because I needed to chill, I needed to relax. But when we're able to show, well, actually, this is what happened, I think that's very useful information to give, because it's the exact opposite of what people are hoping for. Yeah. I think it's quite, we would hope that people aren't drinking to excess on a daily basis, but more, those moderate amounts people might have, which, I had a long day, I'm going to do whatever. It's that habit that I think is very useful to give feedback on. So, well, actually, you may be doing that, and that is your free will to choose whichever lifestyle you wish. But what you can't, people can make whatever choice they want, but what you can't do is detach outcomes from the choices that you make. And I think if we furnish people with information on the outcome, they can perhaps be encouraged to make some slightly different choices. Yeah, absolutely. And then if you think of if a personal trainer's client's data looks like this, and for example, they had a really hard maximal strength workout scheduled the next morning with the PT, and the client comes into the gym and shows that, well, actually, looks like I didn't have a very good night last night, that I didn't get any recovery. So certainly that might require some kind of sort of last minute change of plan, because even from a health perspective, clearly after a night like that, when your heart rate never settles down at all, it's not
very healthy to then push some kind of a high intensity session right after that. So it might even help the PT and the client together make some good adjustments to the plan if needed. All right. I think we are getting close to the end of our time. I'm going to check to see if there is any questions in the Q&A. Let's see. Somebody's asking what is the unit of x-axis on the graph. So in the graph that let me go back to so the time is shown here, obviously from morning to evening, and then this is the strength of reaction. So it doesn't have an actual unit on the left-hand side here, but the higher the red bar is, it means a stronger stress reaction. And for example, in the alcohol example, that was really prominent, that the stress reactions were sort of normal all day, but then they were getting higher and higher as the person was out and about and having some drinks. So strength of reaction that takes into account the heart rate and the heart rate variability. And then on the right-hand side, on the y-axis, you can see the heart rate beats per minute value. So this black graph here is the actual heart rate, and then you can see the beats per minute. So get an idea of, for example, how high the heart rate got during the workout and how low it gets during the night. Great. And one more final slide here, and we can end after that. So this is just one finding from our big data. We have gathered tens and tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of these kind of measurements from people in Scandinavia, all in UK, all around the world. And when we looked at that database and we looked at the data before the pandemic, so this is 2017 to 2020, and then during the pandemic years, this is looking at what we called very passive work days, meaning those kind of work days that had under 1,000 steps per 24-hour period. So very, very inactive, meaning that the people were basically just moving from one room to the next and not really much anything else than that. The change was very dramatic. So before the pandemic, it was not a really large percentage of the population that had these kind of under 1,000 step days. But initially, when the pandemic started, of course, we were all locked down in our houses. It's understandable. But what was more alarming was that for almost 2 years, it stayed significantly higher than before. So people really were having trouble figuring out how to build regular activity into their days in their sort of remote work reality. They weren't going to the gyms and they weren't going anywhere. And as a result, they had a lot of days where they hardly moved at all. On the positive side, it's nice to see that it's starting to get back towards the normal level now here towards the second half of 2022. We are starting to see this line get closer to where it was before, partially because people are going back to the office, but also, I think because the awareness is better, that people are figuring out that even if you're working from your remote office, you still can build in some kind of activity breaks, take a walk at lunchtime or things like that. Any reflection on this, Luke? Is this something that comes up with your clients in your discussions at all?
Yeah, for sure. And people have been more intentional about exercise. During the pandemic, of course, it was, certainly here in the UK, you were limited to, you've got your 20 minutes per day when you can go outside your house and do, and that became, as soon as you're not allowed to do something, the value of it becomes, the perceived value of it becomes much higher. So you're not allowed to exercise, we want to exercise. Where I think we are right now is trying to retain that intentional, that intent to exercise within general population I'm talking about. So now we are allowed to, we're in this kind of quite, I guess, sort of hybrid presentation of fitness. So when gyms were closed and studios were closed, everything became online. Everything was done through an app and people working out in their living room and on their balconies in their gardens, all of this stuff. So that kind of online presentation of fitness blew up. Then gyms opened again, and then there was this kind of, well, what do we do? Are we online or are we back in person? And then now we're in this kind of sort of quite unusual space of doing a little bit of both. And so there are lots of gym studios, trainers who are trying to offer both. They're trying to have a physical space, but then also not lose that that kind of online remote thing that they had to create during lockdown. From a consumer point of view, I think when there's, we now have, I guess, a slightly different problem where it's almost like a paradox of choice. I can do all of this stuff. So when I have too many decisions to make, I can also end up doing nothing. But when it was, you had to be intentional about doing your online workout, you would do it. When there was gyms and you went to the gym after work or in your lunch hour or before work, whenever it was, you would do it. Then when there's this whole almost being overserved of, well, you can do this, and if you miss the gym, you can do an online thing, but if you don't fancy the online thing, you can go to that. There is now this kind of paradox of choice where there's almost too many options. So I think the challenge is trying to keep people intentional about exercise. And that's where I think we are at as an industry now, is just trying to kind of grab people again. And so, well, what are we know to which, where are you going to attach yourself to? Are you going to join a group exercise thing? Are you going to get yourself a PT? Are you going to sign up to an app? Which of it is it going to be? But do something. Yeah, and make a plan. Yeah, absolutely, totally agree with that. That there's so many options, but unless you make a concrete plan of how am I going to fit whatever exercise I choose to do, how do I fit it in my schedule in a concrete level, so it's not left to so it's not always the first thing to drop off when things get busy. So that's where, like, for example, a PT, I think it is a great incentive for so many, because it takes it away from themselves in a way that they put it in your hands and schedule an appointment, and then you're kind of committed to that. So yeah. One question for you, Luke, and then I'll go to the final slide. Somebody had just asked at a general level, when you started your career as a PT, did you start off with individuals or group coaching? Individuals. So I started off, my first job was in a local authority leisure centre. So I started out, and this was in the days when gyms were in like old squash courts. So I used to be setting up like badminton courts and squash courts and all this five-a-side goals and all this kind of stuff. But it was always I always wanted to do the one-to-one thing. It was a much smaller industry back then. We're talking like late 90s, early 2000s. So it was a much smaller industry, but the group exercise thing hadn't really boomed then. So it was always one-to-one was where I was at. Yeah, great. All right, I'd really like to thank Luke for joining us. It was really great to hear your insights and takes on this and your experience from the field. And also thanks for the participants who joined us. Great to have you on board. And here you can see contact information. So if you want to follow Luke on Instagram, he is very active there and puts a lot of interesting training tips. And also his website is here. And if you want to learn more about the Firstbeat Life product, you'd like to think about starting to take it into your own practice, so contact us here at Firstbeat and go to our website, and there's loads of information there that tells a little bit more what it's all about. And yeah, stay tuned to us, and we'll get the recording to you afterwards. So for those of you who joined a little bit late, the recording will be emailed to you in a few days. And thanks again, Luke, and take care. Let's all stay healthy and fit.